And I said that you can't always get what you want.
This is never going to work. That was the reaction inside the room when the tape started rolling. No guitars, no swagger, no blues riff. Instead, a classical choir filled the speakers, clean, disciplined, almost sacred. And for a band whose entire identity was built on danger and rebellion, it sounded completely wrong. Yet that was the moment the Rolling Stones crossed a line they were never supposed to cross. At the end of the 1960s, there were invisible rules every rock band followed. Whether they admitted it or not, songs had to hit fast, sound familiar, stay radio-friendly, and above all, stay in character. The Stones were the anti-Beatles, the dirty counterweight to polish and elegance. Choirs didn't belong anywhere near them, but one song ignored every warning sign. It opened the wrong way. It ran too long. It used instruments the Stones had never touched before. One band member didn't even play on it, and the message at its core didn't promise victory, rebellion, or escape. It promised disappointment. By all logic, it should have collapsed under its own weight. Instead, it became one of the most quoted, misunderstood, and enduring songs in rock history. What happened inside that studio wasn't careful planning. It was risk layered on top of risk, and tension layered on top of ego. And the first rule it broke was the one no Rolling Stones song had ever dared to challenge. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Mick Jagger and Rolling Stones and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel. Rock songs weren't supposed to start politely. They opened with a punch, a riff, a drum hit, something that grabbed you by the collar and didn't let go. Especially Rolling Stones songs. Their music kicked down doors. It didn't ask permission. So when you can't always get what you want begins with a formal choir, it feels almost like a mistake. Voices rise in harmony, measured and controlled, sounding closer to a cathedral than a club. For fans expecting grit, it was jarring. Inside the band's world, this wasn't just unusual, it was risky. The Stones had spent years cultivating an image that rejected refinement. Blues, roots, raw energy, danger. And suddenly, here they were aligning themselves with something traditionally associated with discipline and tradition. The contrast was intentional. Mick Jagger understood that starting the song this way would disarm the listener. It created discomfort. You didn't know where you were being led, and that uncertainty became part of the experience. But the choir also introduced a theme that would define the song: expectation versus reality. What you think you're getting, and what actually arrives. The moment the choir fades out, the song doesn't resolve itself. It waits. It withholds. And when the band finally enters, it feels earned, not explosive, but deliberate. That opening didn't just break a songwriting rule. It rewired how the listener experienced the entire song. And that was only the beginning of the trouble. If the opening didn't scare people, the length certainly did. At over 7 minutes on the album, You Can't Always Get What You Want ignored one of the most rigid expectations of its time. Radio favored brevity. Songs were supposed to move quickly, deliver a chorus early, and repeat it enough times to burn into memory. This song refused to do any of that. Instead of a clear verse-chorus cycle, it unfolds in sections, almost like a story told in chapters. Moments arrive, disappear, and return later transformed. The choir vanishes. The band takes over. Then, when you've nearly forgotten the opening, it comes back reframed, heavier, more emotional. There's patience baked into the structure. Confidence. The song doesn't chase attention. It assumes you'll stay. That alone made executives nervous. But what really set it apart was the tempo. It doesn't rush. It doesn't explode. It builds slowly, letting tension accumulate instead of releasing it quickly. For a band known for immediacy, this was a gamble. Yet the gamble worked because the song made time feel intentional. Each section added weight to the message. Each delay sharpened the payoff. By the time the final chorus hits, it doesn't feel repetitive, it feels inevitable. But length and structure weren't the only boundaries being crossed. The very sound of the song was drifting into unfamiliar territory. And not everyone was comfortable with where it was going. Listen closely, and you'll notice something unsettling. This doesn't sound like a traditional Rolling Stones recording. There's piano that leans closer to gospel than blues. There's French horn, an instrument almost unheard of in the band's earlier work. Percussion feels layered, textured, almost cinematic. Instead of raw minimalism, the arrangement feels expansive, as if the song is breathing outward. For some inside the band's orbit, this was thrilling. For others, it felt dangerous. Keith Richards had always believed that simplicity was power. Strip it down. Let the groove speak. Adding orchestral textures risked blurring the band's identity. It raised an uncomfortable question. Were the Stones evolving? Or drifting? Mick saw it differently. He wasn't trying to polish the band. He was trying to stretch it. The instruments weren't decoration, they were emotional tools, reinforcing the song's message of disillusionment and acceptance. What made it work was restraint. Even with unfamiliar elements, nothing overwhelms the core. The song never loses its grounding. It balances elegance with unease. Still, the tension was real. This wasn't just experimentation. It was a negotiation over what the Rolling Stones were allowed to sound like. And then came the moment that made everything even more complicated. One of the band's most essential members wasn't playing at all. There's an unspoken rule inside bands like the Rolling Stones. You don't make a Rolling Stones song without Charlie Watts. Charlie wasn't flashy. He didn't fight for attention. But his drumming was the spine of the band, steady, elegant, immovable. And that's why what happened during this recording quietly shocked everyone involved. Charlie didn't play drums on You Can't Always Get What You Want. It wasn't a dramatic walkout or a public argument. It was subtler than that and more uncomfortable. The groove the song needed wasn't locking in the way the producer imagined it. Time was tight, pressure was high. And rather than force the issue, producer Jimmy Miller stepped in and played the drums himself. In another band, this might have gone unnoticed. In the Rolling Stones, it was seismic. No one liked talking about it afterward. Charlie rarely commented. The band moved on. But the moment lingered. It exposed how far the song had drifted from their usual instincts, so far that even their rhythmic foundation temporarily stepped aside. Ironically, that absence gave the track a different feel. The drums aren't aggressive. They're patient, restrained, almost observational. They let the song breathe. It was another rule quietly broken. The idea that the band had to function as a fixed machine. And just when the structure seemed unusual enough, the song delivered its most unsettling move of all, its message. Most great rock songs offer something simple: escape, rebellion, confidence, victory. This one offered none of that. Mick Jagger didn't write "You Can't Always Get What You Want" as a rallying cry. He wrote it as an observation, sharp, ironic, and deeply human. The lyrics follow moments of frustration, unmet desire, and quiet disappointment. There's no explosion at the end, no triumph, just acceptance. That was risky. Listeners didn't expect the Rolling Stones to tell them limits existed, yet that's exactly what the song does. Over and over, it confronts the listener with the same uncomfortable truth. Wanting isn't enough. But then, right when the message feels almost too bleak, Mick twists the knife gently. You get what you need. That line isn't hopeful, it's ambiguous. It can sound comforting or cruel depending on where you're standing. And that's why it stuck. The brilliance wasn't in shouting the message. It was in letting the listener wrestle with it. The song didn't dictate meaning, it invited interpretation. Decades later, people still quote that line in moments of frustration, loss, or compromise. Not because it promises happiness, but because it feels honest. And honesty, especially in rock music, can be more unsettling than rebellion. Behind that honesty, though, was a deeper tension, one that had nothing to do with lyrics. By the time this song took shape, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards weren't pulling in the same direction anymore, not instinctively, at least. Mick was expanding. He wanted the Stones to be bigger than blues, bigger than rebellion, bigger than their own mythology. He saw possibility in contrast, irony, even restraint. Songs could be cinematic, messages could be layered. Keith trusted something else: feel, groove, identity. To him, the Stones worked best when they stayed close to the bone. Every added layer risked diluting the magic. You Can't Always Get What You Want sat directly on that fault line. Mick pushed forward, shaping the song's structure, tone, and message. Keith followed, but not without resistance. The tension didn't erupt into a fight. It simmered. And that simmering energy became part of the song's DNA. Instead of smoothing the differences out, the track holds them in balance. Elegance and grit, acceptance and frustration, expansion and restraint. That's why the song doesn't collapse under its contradictions. It survives them. In a strange way, neither Mick nor Keith fully won this battle, and that's exactly why the song works. It isn't comfortable. It isn't pure. It isn't simple. It's a compromise and a revelation. But one last piece pushed the story into myth, and it came from voices that were never meant to be there at all. The choir was never supposed to be part of this world. The Rolling Stones represented excess, danger, and disorder. The voices that opened "You Can't Always Get What You Want" came from a place of discipline, structure, and tradition. Putting those two forces together felt almost provocative. The London Bach Choir entered the studio as professionals. They followed sheet music. They followed rules. And suddenly, they found themselves surrounded by a band whose creative process thrived on chaos. The contrast was immediate. According to accounts from that period, the atmosphere was uncomfortable, not hostile but misaligned. Two cultures sharing the same space without speaking the same language. Some members of the choir later distanced themselves from the project, uncomfortable with the environment surrounding the Let It Bleed sessions. That tension only strengthened the song. The choir doesn't soften the track, it frames it. It creates a false sense of purity that the rest of the song slowly dismantles. When the band finally takes over, the shift feels deliberate, as if innocence has stepped aside and reality has taken its place. What makes this moment so powerful is restraint. The choir doesn't dominate the entire track. It appears, vanishes, and returns only at the end transformed, heavier, no longer untouched. It's another rule broken, borrowing a voice that doesn't belong, then letting it change. And when listeners finally realized what the song was doing, it was already too late. The message had landed. Many artists have tried to replicate what this song achieved. They've copied the length, the slow build, the layered instruments. Some even borrowed choirs. But something always feels missing. That's because "You Can't Always Get What You Want" isn't powerful because of technique. It's powerful because of balance. Every risky choice is countered by restraint. Every expansion is grounded by simplicity. The song lives in contradiction. It sounds elegant but feels restless. It delivers a message of acceptance wrapped in frustration. It grows without ever exploding. Most importantly, it refuses to tell the listener how to feel. That's the part most imitations get wrong. They push too hard. They over-explain. They chase drama instead of letting it breathe. The Stones didn't chase anything here. They trusted the discomfort. Another reason the song resists imitation is timing. It arrived at a moment when disillusionment was settling in. The optimism of the 60s was fading. People weren't looking for anthems anymore, they were looking for honesty. The Stones captured that shift without announcing it. They let it unfold naturally. That's why the song still feels relevant. It doesn't belong to one generation. It belongs to moments when expectations collapse and clarity replaces excitement. And that realization leads to the most emotional truth of all. Over time, something strange happened. The song didn't age like a hit. It aged like a statement. As decades passed, "You Can't Always Get What You Want" outlived trends, formats, and even parts of the band's own mythology. It showed up in films, political moments, and personal turning points, not because it was catchy, but because it felt true. Listeners returned to it during disappointment, compromise, and transition. The song didn't promise rescue. It offered perspective. That's why it quietly became one of the Rolling Stones' most meaningful works, even if it wasn't always their most celebrated. It spoke to adulthood, not rebellion, to understanding limits, not breaking them. And in doing so, it broke the final rule no rock band was supposed to break. It matured without losing relevance. If this story resonated with you, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden tension, risk, and humanity behind legendary music, this is exactly what this channel is about. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which Rolling Stones song do you think broke the rules the most? Because sometimes the songs that shouldn't work are the ones that stay with us the longest. In the end, "You Can't Always Get What You Want" didn't just break songwriting rules. It broke an expectation far deeper than structure, sound, or length. It told people the truth quietly. At a time when rock music thrived on confidence and certainty, the Rolling Stones delivered a song that accepted limits instead of denying them. They allowed space for disappointment, contradiction, and reflection. And that honesty is why the song never faded. Every risky choice, the choir, the length, the unfamiliar instruments, the absence of a band member, the restrained ending added to a message that didn't need to shout. It trusted the listener to stay, to think, to feel. Most bands chase moments. This song survived them, and that may be the greatest rule it ever broke. It proved that a rock band could slow down, question itself, and still leave a mark that outlasted rebellion. Not because it gave people what they wanted, but because, somehow, it gave them what they needed.